1. I have worked in a hospital for a few years now. It's just for a service department, so it's nothing fancy. After about a year into my employment here, I saw an older man seemingly appear out of nowhere on several occasions. It was a Saturday afternoon, so the halls were mostly deserted. I was walking down a long, empty corridor, looking straight ahead. I wasn't looking around or tired, or even thinking of anything else. My full attention was on the hall in front of me. At around the halfway point, a man just appeared in the hall in front of me. There are no doors nearby, and the other end of the hall was 30 feet behind him, so he couldn't have just walked up without me noticing. The hall was empty, and then, pop, a guy is standing there. He looked just as confused as I was, as if he had no idea where he was. He was a relatively tall, 60-year-old man, clean-shaven with a comb-over. He had khaki pants, a pastel red and yellow pinstriped dress shirt, and a clipboard. We made eye contact for a second. He looked past me, behind himself, and at his clipboard before walking past me, like nothing happened. The following week, I saw him again. It was a weekday, so things were busier. There is an elevator set back into a little alcove near where I work. I was walking toward it when I heard the ding of the elevator arriving, and then the doors opening. Just before I turned into the alcove, clipboard guy walks out and walks right past me. I turned to catch the elevator before it left, but it wasn't there. The elevator was 3 floors above me. I know this because I could hear the voices of the guys from engineering and hear them offloading something heavy into their workshop. The next day, I got into a stainless steel freight elevator and hit the button for my floor. Just before the doors shut, I heard hurried footsteps and the door opened back up. All right, someone wanted to catch a ride. No one was waiting to come in, though. Nothing much at all happened besides the noticeable, echoing footsteps walking in, and the thump of someone leaning up against a metal wall. The last time I experienced anything like this was a few days later. My hospital has nearly every door hooked up to a button on the wall. I was walking at a good pace and trying to stay out of the way, so I was as close to the wall as could be. A door was coming up, and I remembered about a half a second too late that I was supposed to hit the switch, while still going forward. I twisted and leaned back a bit to reach the button as I went past. Who else would be behind me than clipboard guy? The thing was, he was walking the other way. He was immediately, and I mean 1 to 2 feet behind me, walking at a brisk pace in the opposite direction. In order for him to be there, and walking at that speed, he would have had to walk through the same space I did at the same time. I didn't see him ahead of me beforehand, but he was tight to the wall just like I was. The only people I have ever told about this are my wife, my parents, and one close friend. I won't let any of my co-workers know for fear of being branded as the crazy one. If it was just one of those events, I could brush it off as just misremembering what happened. The culmination of 4 unique events, especially the first one, has convinced me this really was what I saw. This involves objects popping into existence, noises that aren't there, and spatial situations that just can't happen. Again, I could write that off. But it all centers around the same mysterious gentleman that I haven't seen before or since. It still makes me feel uneasy 2 years later. Edit. If it wasn't under such abnormal circumstances, I wouldn't think twice seeing this guy around. He was a pretty generic-looking 60-year-old man that you might expect to be in an administrative role. The only odd behavior of his, aside from being pulled from another dimension apparently, was when he first appeared. He looked so confused, almost startled. The very second I saw him, his expression changed from neutral to concerned before confusion set in. He glanced around in front and behind, but it didn't seem to help him much. He acted like he was shocked to suddenly be standing in that hallway. Edit 2. Some people have been asking if this could be paranormal. I strictly don't believe in ghosts. I'm not against the idea of multiple realities and parallel universes. Why else would I be in the subreddit? I was hesitant to include this in the main post, but here we go. Admittedly, my first encounter with this guy was in the same hallway the morgue was in. It probably isn't relevant, but it is interesting nonetheless. The elevator involved in encounter number 2 and number 3 is the trauma elevator that connects the emergency department and the OR. My last run-in happened as I was walking out of the OR. Clipboard guy was on his way in when I last saw him. 2. Ever since I was young, I have experienced many glitches. Usually when I share them with people, I end up alienating myself because it just sounds too crazy. Some might call them ghost stories, as a few of them could be interpreted as poltergeists and whatnot. But not all. I have so many experiences to share. My fiancé thinks my dad is an indigo child, making me a crystal child. It's intriguing, but I'm still unconvinced. We also talk about the universal hologram theory quite a lot, and she is a fellow believer that this may all be just a simulation. Either way, most people either believe or they don't. So I'll just share what I can remember and let you be the judge. I think after reading some of the posts here, I might actually find some open-minded people who would be interested in hearing these stories of mine, and maybe even help me make sense of it all. I'll start with 2 of my most inexplicable events, mainly because it's some of the few that was experienced with other people. I'm still in contact with a couple of these friends and they still remember. Most of these experiences happened when I was younger, and so it was with both of these events. My dad was an Army Corps engineer, and as such, my brothers and I were in the Boy Scouts, some of the best times of my life. We had a large, very active troop with some badass leaders. Once a month we would go camping, and it was on one such trip at Sand Hill Compound in Spring Hill, Florida. I was 13 years old, and after setting up camp early that morning, some of my friends wanted to go on a hike. In actuality, we just wanted to get away from the adults because one of the older boys brought the tiniest joint ever made. And we tried to go for a smoke. The good old days. Am I right? So we go walking. There were 6 of us, and we did not make it far before dude says he dropped it. Typical. The search ensues. We backtrack, as I said. We did get far from the camp, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, so we're actually nervous. One of the leaders might find it, and we're scrambling all over each other, trying to find this pinner on the trail, in the woods. Well, it being Florida, there were some serious-looking clouds overhead, but no one paid them any mind. We looked around for quite some time, maybe half an hour. Still noonish. During our search on the trail, which again was no more than 10 to 15 minutes from camp, the sun disappeared behind the clouds. The air grew super cold as gusts of wind blasted us out of nowhere. And it got dark, like really dark, really fast too. When a storm front rolls in, it will get dark suddenly, but only a little. You can still tell it's daylight outside. Well, I tell you, we, as a group, saw the light just go. We panic like hard. It's just bizarre. It totally freaks us out. It was effing nighttime. Just a few minutes ago, it was a bright mid-morning day, and now it was so dark, you needed a flashlight. We run back to camp. It's further than we remembered, but we make it there quickly. The leaders were furious. They've been looking for us for hours. It was well after 8 p.m. Somehow. They told the park rangers and they had begun to search for us. They used a bullhorn to call for us. They were in the trucks driving the trails, but we heard nothing. Granted, this is the woods, but we're The only ones out there, on well-known trails. Trails we've been down dozens of times before. We were well within earshot of the camp. There was no reason the adults couldn't have found us. And we should have heard them shouting. We all told them everything, about the joint and all, which we never found. They did not believe us and cancelled the rest of the camp out. We packed up the next morning and went home. The troop argued about it so many times over so many meetings after that, but the adults never believed us. They just thought we went and just took off or whatever. No one can explain it. A similar time slip happened about a year later at my house. I was about 14 years old, and me and my best friend got off the bus, which was right in front of my house, one day when it was pouring outside. We did our customary kid after-school deal, bathroom breaks, get some snacks, and hit Nintendo. I made it to the 3rd level of Super Mario Bros. 3. This was all of 20 minutes later, roughly 3:15 p.m. I got about halfway through the level when there was an extraordinarily close lightning strike, like one that racks your lungs and makes the house shake. Blinding flash, then darkness. The power blew, but it was dark. Nighttime. My brother came out of his bedroom, and that was really strange. He was still in middle school and got home an hour after us, as we were in high school. He got scared by the lightning and came out to check on the dogs, and was surprised to see us. He says when he got home there was no one there. We never saw him come home either. The clock on the wall said 8:16, and it died there. It was an old analog deal, but it never worked again. Weird. Me and my buddy freaked out, like we both started crying. It was so strange. Talking about it frantically, we both knew that there was no way that time just jumped 4 hours, but sure as shit, my parents got home soon after and my friend sneaked out the back because what else? He was in trouble for getting home so late too. Of course, no one believed us, and it still freaks me out to this day. This is just a couple of my many very unexplainable happenings, and I hope you all might understand what I went through. It looks like time slippage is more common than I thought, but these 2 events were the only times it happened to me that I can be sure of. I feel I've lost a few hours in other situations, but was never really sure. I don't know what to expect sharing these things with you all, but if you like them, I'd like to share a bunch more. I have a journal full of my weird shit. Sometimes I'd swear I was a walking glitch. Maybe I finally found someone willing to hear it all. 3. I've never told anyone. After some friends back then didn't believe me. I've had 3 sightings of what I believe to be the same thing, and maybe a 4th one, although I'm not sure of that one. They happened 3 to 4 months apart, over the time span of about a year. This must have been in 2004 or 2005, when I was 16 or 17 years old. The first time was while I was smoking a cigarette on the balcony of my mom's city apartment at night. Since our building was part of a triangular street block, the balcony looked out on the gardens and balconies of other apartment buildings. I was just staring down into the gardens when I see a bright light turn on in the upper periphery of my vision. I look up where it was located in the middle of the sky, and I see this incredibly bright, bluish-white point of light. This thing was bright, I can't stress this enough. It was much brighter than any star, the moon, airplanes, or any light coming from the apartment windows. It just hung there for 1 to 2 seconds, and then it started to move. Not fast, not slow, but steady and straight down. What struck me as odd was the lack of ramping up. It went from not moving to moving at a certain fixed speed without transition. It seemed unnatural. This is probably not relevant, but I'm a web designer, and I do animations all the time, and that's not how you do proper animation. It flew down and disappeared behind a thick pine tree. I stared at the tree for another 15 minutes, hoping it would show itself again, but it didn't. Nothing too weird, so I quickly forgot about it. A few months later, I was at my dad's house in another part of the country. Parents were separated and me and my siblings did week. I was again smoking a cig, but this time out of my bedroom window that looked out on our garden. It was night time. I saw the exact same thing, including the tree disappearance trick. To the back of our garden, slightly to the left. I again stared at the tree for quite a while, although a bit longer because by now I was slightly spooked. Another 3 to 4 months passed, and this time I was riding the bus in the city. It was almost dark out, like twilight. I was listening to music and staring out of the window. Suddenly I noticed a bright bluish-white dot in the sky. It looked very similar, but farther away this time, also higher. It was still bright, but not as bright, and its radius seemed smaller. Two things that are consistent with a higher altitude. I fixated on it for what must have been several minutes. It was a very grey, completely overcast day. No stars or moon out, only clouds and this thing. It never moved, but eventually the bus went behind a row of trees. And when we passed the trees and I could see the whole sky again, the thing was gone. This is one I'm not sure of. It didn't move, although it still pulled off its tree disappearance in a clever way. I didn't think to ask other people if they saw it because, on its own, it could have been anything, I guess. I also remember this is when I realized it was exactly 3 or 4 months ago. Can't remember the exact amount of months now. That I saw the other one, and another almost exact 3 or 4 months from that one until the first sighting. I remember this spooked me a little. The last sighting was, again, almost exactly 3 or 4 months later. God, I wish I wrote the dates down. And this one is the big one. I was again smoking a cigarette out of my window at my dad's, but this time I was joined by my then girlfriend. We were just talking, and I distinctly remember, this might sound weird, that I gasped before I registered why. I remember hearing myself gasp and having a startled reaction, and then visually registering that I saw the familiar bluish-white dot again. I was very startled. It was much closer than the other 3 times. It seemed larger and brighter, which is consistent with being closer. I point at it and ask my girlfriend, "What's that?" As if she would know, she doesn't answer. 1 or 2 seconds later it starts moving again, unnaturally, without ramping up, but this time from hanging completely still as a star in the sky, to breakneck speed. It moved almost straight away from us, into the distance before us. What was cool was that about half a kilometer out in the distance was a very large factory building that provided us with a distance marker. If it would have moved away into empty sky, you wouldn't really be able to be sure that it actually moved away or even judge how fast or in what direction. Not in our situation. It sped off, and less than a second later, it was flying over the factory, which I knew to be about 300 to 600 meters away. We were able to see it fly until it disappeared, who knows how far into the distance. It didn't blink out. It gradually, however very rapidly, grew smaller and dimmer, consistent with something that moves away from you, all the way until it was too small and or too dim to discern in the night sky. It made no sound. It did leave a bit of a trail like a shooting star, but less pronounced. It was also much brighter, and it started from a still position, not more than a few hundred meters from the ground, unlike a meteorite. It also slightly wobbled. I looked at my girlfriend and she had tears in her eyes, probably from startling. I tried discussing it with her afterwards, but she didn't really seem interested. She was oddly short about it. just said she didn't know what she saw, slightly agitated. I never saw anything like that again. 4. Some background. This happened to me when I was in college, about a year ago now. I live near a very big city where I work, hang out, and went to school. To get into the city, I take the subway. I've lived in the area my entire life, and I've taken the train thousands and thousands of times. Which is to say, I'm intimately familiar and comfortable with the trip, and could probably do it with my eyes closed. So I wake up, it's like any other morning. Get dressed and head out to catch the subway train into the city so I can get to class. My class is off hours, so there's not many people in the cart. Maybe like 6 or 7. So I sit down and wait for the train to leave the station. The time between leaving the station and the first stop is usually around 10 minutes. I get off at the third stop, which is another 2 or 3 minutes after the first. So the train leaves the station, and I start to nod off just like I do every other time. The train arriving in the first station always wakes me up, if I ever fall asleep too heavily, which I almost never do. I obsessively look at my watch, on my way to class to make sure I'm not running late. Anyway, I suddenly wake up, I check my watch to see what time it is. I nodded out for about 2 minutes. I pick my head up and look around, and right away I notice something is wrong. My whole world has been flipped, and I mean that literally. Everything is on the opposite side of where I know it. I'm super confused. People that were sitting on the left or on the right, posters on the right or on the left. Nobody seems to notice anything. I can't understand what's going on. I thought maybe I'm just confused. This can't be possible, you know? But we get to the first stop, and the subway doors open on the wrong side, and I know something isn't right. Stop 2, and it opens on the wrong side. Stop 3, and I get up to get off the train, and it feels really wrong to get off on this side, and I know it's wrong. I'm walking up off the platform and up to street level, and I feel lost and confused. I recognize where I am, but everything seems new, like I haven't done this a million times. So I go up the stairs to street level, and things start to look more familiar, but I know it still doesn't feel right. Something inside me is scared and confused in a way I haven't felt before. I keep walking, and it slowly feels better and better. I don't know what really happened that day. I don't know if things really changed back, or if something happened to make me just accept this new reality as my own. And as an aside, my mind was just blown that it's interview with the vampire and not interview with a vampire. 5. This story has backstory to the Pinnacle, but first, some information about myself. I am currently a 21-year-old male. At the time, I was a freshman in high school. I'm a massive guy and always have been. I am currently 6'4" and was 6'3" in freshman year. I am not muscular, but have a muscular build and broad shoulders. I have always had some weird connections with the paranormal and lived in a very religious family growing up. Example, when I was only 4, my mom reports putting me down for a nap to find out I hadn't slept at all. But she said I told her I spent that nap meeting my guardian angel and playing with him. I even told her his name was Michael. Many people in my family report seeing angels and beings throughout their lives. It is not uncommon to hear these events through family events or tragic accidents. While I was a freshman in high school, I spent a lot of time hanging out with my very, very religious friend Nate. I personally was not very faithful in the Christian belief of God at the time. This was a time in my life where I was very confused with how the world worked and didn't believe faith was necessary. Still don't. This is mildly important as it relates. The first night was an absolutely normal night, as I was at my best friend Nate's house. Of course, we decided to invite some girls over to hang out. But as teens living in a small town in Wisconsin, we really didn't like to go out unless the adventure had already been pre-planned. So that night, we decided to sit on Nate's computer and go through our MySpaces and browse YouTube. The girls seemed a little off, like something was bothering them. While browsing YouTube, I noticed a cool-looking UFO sighting. Mind you, I was obsessed with aliens, so I clicked on it, and when I did, the two girls freaked out. They then went on to explain that 2 nights prior to this, they were hanging out with another girl who told them that she was abducted, and had markings to prove it. The girls reported after hearing this story they were mildly on edge, but later that night, they both fell asleep. When they woke up, they had random scars on their chest and back, and felt ridiculously tired as they woke like they had been up all night. They were simply freaked out, and spouted to me these events after clicking the video, and begged me to turn it off. We continued our night without any crazy stuff happening. I joked with the girls that Nate and I were next for a while. Nate, being so religious, was calling BS on them the whole time, and trying to rationalize it into religion. And that pretty much drove them home, which I was okay with because it was getting late. The next day I went home to shower and change, then headed right back to Nathan's house. We hung out pretty much every day. Nothing crazy happened that day besides some goofy shenanigans and video games. Later that night, Nate was on MySpace. The computer was set in the dining room in the corner furthest from the living room. The living room was separated by a wall with a double-door hallway, without the door but with a curtain separating them. The living room was set up, with both couches against both walls, and the TV opposite the couches in the other corner. From the living room, you could see the stairs going up to the second story from the living room. Between the living room and the stairs was the front door, going out to a 3-season room deck, then to the outside. I sat on the small couch with full visibility of the stairs, but no visibility of Nate, due to the curtain and half part of the double doors cutting off my vision. I knew he was on MySpace because I could hear the constant chatter of keyboard keys and quiet music, due to the rest of his family sleeping. He was listening to Skillet Monster, and I was watching Adult Swim on Cartoon Network, and it was about 10:10 p.m. Robot Chicken was my favorite show on earth at the time, and I was enjoying it. When out of nowhere I noticed a light shine through the window at the top of the stairs, shining down the stairs as if someone flipped on the lights. In my mind, I thought it was his mom or dad, so I switched the channel so I wouldn't get in trouble for watching Adult Swim. Then I noticed the light continuing to shine down the stairs. Also began to shine through the front door and the bay window, looking into the 3-season room. Mind you, this was all happening in a matter of seconds. Next thing I knew, the light had shined through all those windows, and then from the window behind me. As I couldn't scream, I panicked in my head that a nuke went off, or there was a cult of cars with LED high beams surrounding the house. The light then made a pulsing vibration similar to a plane flying but closer to your ears, and more calming like a heartbeat. As the light grew in vibrancy and blocked out all other visual things, so I could no longer see anything except white. In this moment, I turned my head towards where Nate was, and regardless of the wall dividing us, I somehow saw him, and he saw me. He was floating as if he were sitting in an invisible computer chair, except pure whiteness almost floating. As if the walls had been removed, and he was looking at me in a state of panic. All I could say was, "What the fuck?" in a quiet voice, as if I was whispering, but inside my head I was screaming. As soon as my sentence was finished, the whiteness blinked away, and I was still sitting on the couch, watching the same TV, and Nate was still on MySpace. But as this happened, coming back to reality, Nathan and I both jumped up from our seats and started freaking out about what just happened. Nathan said he heard me say, "What the fuck?" and saw me floating as well, but he said my mouth didn't move when talking. He swears it was something to do with God. I resorted to aliens due to what the girls had reported. After we got done freaking out and waking up his dad, on accident, he went back to sleep after hearing our ridiculous testimony. Nathan and I then both sat in the living room in silence, until I realized that we were watching an infomercial on Cartoon Network. It was about 3:30 a.m. I jumped up and screamed at Nathan. We had been gone for about 5 hours. In those 10 seconds, we were away from reality for 5 hours. I've told many people of this story and will tell it the rest of my life, whether it was a glitch, abduction, or some sort of religious experience. It was still amazing and profound, and I will never forget the vibration inside of this light. Also, I should report, I didn't get any particular markings that startled me in any way. I am now agnostic, and I smoke pot now to try to feel that glitch feeling again. Which has worked, but I have only seen that bright light one other time since that time. But that time I got to see the source of it, and it was not earthly. Mind you, being a freshman in high school, I didn't do drugs or have any mental issues besides teenage angst. Long story short, I am still very close with Nate, and we tell everyone close to us, separately, to try to prove our experience. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories, number 11. You know, I almost forgot this was Wednesday, which is when I usually record the glitch stories. I also usually do my paranormal video on the same day. And I suddenly realized I don't have enough stories. What am I going to do? But thankfully, very kind people came through last minute for me, so thanks to those people, we have a pretty good length glitch video today. And the reason I forgot what day of the week it was is because I'm kind of swamped getting this Halloween video out. It's turned out to be much longer than I thought, but I think it's going to be worth all the work in the long term, so there's really no issue there. It's just, you know, it's an unexpected longer video. And because I need to go and continue working hard on that, I'm going to cut the outro a little short for this particular video. I just want to thank everyone for allowing me to use their stories. I'd also like to say thank you very much and welcome to my newer subscribers. And thank you to my existing subscribers. You're all very nice people, and some of you confuse me with the things you post, but that's alright. I like you nonetheless. And with that, I'm going to... What am I going to do? Oh yeah, I'm going to go work on the next video. Okay, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.